I stood at the door of my own son's birthday party, and a girl with a clipboard told me, "This party isn't for you." Every head turned as I set down the homemade carrot cake I had carried like a baby. Ashley's smile froze from across the room, and Daniel never even saw me yet. I took a breath, straightened my church choir blazer, and did the one thing no one there will ever forget. It wasn't shouting. It was something far sharper than that. Let me rewind and tell you how a mother becomes unwelcome at her own child's celebration. When Daniel married Ashley, the word boundaries started showing up like weeds in our texts. I was told not to call him Danny anymore, to let them be adults, and to run ideas by the group chat. Thanksgiving shifted from my pot roast to her curated grazing board with labels and rules. I smiled, brought deviled eggs, and offered to wash dishes while they posed for Instagram. I thought kindness could sand down the edges, but those edges were blades. On the morning of his 35th, I did what I have always done in this country-sized love. I brewed Folgers, walked Daisy around the block with my neighbors in fleece, and preheated the oven. I grated carrots by hand for the cake he's picked since Little League, and I tucked a Springsteen vinyl into craft paper from Target. I scanned old photos into a little slideshow on a red USB, notes in my neat teacher handwriting. I picked up a bundle of Trader Joe's sunflowers and helium balloons from Party City that said Dan. I told myself I was just adding warmth, not taking over, and that Ashley would see that. Her text pinged while the frosting chilled. "Hey, Margaret, we've got a caterer, so no homemade due to allergies. Also, adults-only vibe, smart casual, and please arrive at 7:30 after guests settle. Less mom energy, yeah?" I stared at the screen and inhaled the cinnamon in my kitchen until my eyes stopped stinging. I boxed the cake anyway with a note that said, "For Daniel to take home," and taped the USB to the lid. I put on my navy slacks, my pearl studs, and flat shoes because brewery floors are slick. I left early like I always do, because in America, if you're on time, you're late. The Copper Fox parking lot buzzed with SUVs, laughter, and a 90s playlist shaking the patio lights. A 20-something with an iPad at a chalkboard sign asked for my name and then pursed her lips. Per the host, "This party isn't for you," she said, and Ashley's hand fluttered in the background like a flag. I felt 66 years of PTA bake sales, night shifts, and lullabies settle into my spine. I set the cake on the welcome table, squared my shoulders, and chose a move no one there will ever forget. This is how "not for you" became my battle cry. If you've ever been pushed out of your own child's life, follow along and hit that bell, because you're about to see what grace looks like with a backbone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't even look at Ashley. I took one more step past the chalkboard sign like I belonged in my own life, and I did the thing I've done since my first day teaching 6th grade. I found a microphone, because the truth carries better when it has a little amplification. The Copper Fox's patio had a string of Edison bulbs and a Bluetooth mic propped near the bar for trivia nights. I moved toward it like a woman moving toward a hymn. The 20-something at the iPad said, "Ma'am," and I smiled at her with the smile that calmed rooms full of preteens with scissors in their hands. My palm was steady when I set that carrot cake down on the welcome table, the red USB taped to the lid like a seal. "Good evening," I said, testing the mic with a small tap. To my surprise, the sound obligingly rose above the 90s playlist. Heads turned, shoulders aligned. People love direction when they didn't realize they needed it. Ashley's hand fluttered faster, bird to hawk. She was across the patio in 3 steps, her gold heels silent on the wood. "Margaret?" "No." She looked impeccable, her honey hair blown out, the neckline of her satin slip dress showing a diamond my son can't afford yet. She's all neutral tones until you notice the sharp. I anchored my feet, flat squeaking just once. 2 minutes, I said into the mic, always the length I tell myself I'll take at funerals and wind up pushing to 5. That's all. In the far corner, my son was laughing with 2 men in tech hoodies. He didn't see me yet. His shoulder blades under his chambray shirt lifted and fell. His laughter is his father's. "Tonight," I began, keeping my eyes on the middle distance so I could keep my voice. "We're celebrating a boy I called Danny till he tucked his shirt into a graduation gown and told me I could let go. His face went still in that way it did when he was about to hit a line drive, and he couldn't think about anything else. I gave him the smile I've practiced for 35 years, the smile that says we are okay even when we're not. "Daniel," I said, making it sound like pride, not concession, "I brought you something you've loved since you were 8. It's on the welcome table for you to take home." I tapped the cake with the back of my hand, more symbol than advertising. And because I know how these things go, I lifted the red USB with its bright tape, the label on it in my teacher printing, Dan 35. I made a little slideshow. It's yours. You don't have to play it now. Let's not, take over. Let's do cake later. We've got a caterer with contract exclusivity and allergies, so no outside food tonight. Sorry. She projected that last part like a flight attendant, including the apology she didn't feel. She'd said contract exclusivity like this was a spunk-on post and not a birthday. It made an uneasy thing click into place. The surfboard-shaped neon at the bar read "Drink Local," and taped next to it was a discreet standee. Copper Fox X, hosted by Ashley McGallwasher 35 Vibes. Her ring glinted under it. There were little cards by the artisan pretzels, pairing provided by Tastecraft Catering. There was even a tripod set up, halo light ready for those spontaneous candids. I'm not here to take over. I'm here to lift up. When Daniel was 6 and broke his arm climbing the maple out front, he told the ER doctor he couldn't cry because he was a tough guy. He didn't want to look at me until the x-ray was done because he knew if he did, I'd let the crying come. He's always tried to make room for other people to be themselves. That's his gift. He's the kid who split the orange slices evenly at Little League even when he wanted the biggest one. He's the man who took my car at midnight to the mechanic when he heard my brakes scraping and didn't tell me he put it on his credit card. He is his father's homing beacon and my reason to keep learning TikTok dances even though my hip says otherwise. I felt the curve of a laugh ripple through the patio. I looked at my son, really looked. He looked like he wanted to smile and like he wanted to hide. Ashley's manicured hand drifted down the mic stand. Her wrist bones are so delicate. I could break them with a harsh word, which is why I've never used one. We really can't without... She gestured at an imaginary binder, violating the vendor terms. She gave a tiny shrug and glanced at Ashley's glittering watch, then at me, as if to say she was just here to plate the hummus. I brought Daniel a Springsteen album, I said, holding up the wrapped square. You can laugh at that. I know you stream now and vinyl is for people who remember when radios had dials, but he and his dad sang to that record while they painted his room celestial blue. It has always on my mind in pencil on the sleeve, because I always put that on when I miss his father. Maybe this is just me clinging to objects. I shrugged, the teacher again, naming the obvious and refusing to sit in shame. But sometimes a thing is how you carry a person through the world. Ashley leaned in then, and her smile had edges. Thank you, Margaret, she purred into the mic. So sweet. Everyone, drink tickets are on the table. The station is pescatarian, gluten-free, and parent-free. It's the cut that doesn't bleed until you get home. She is very good at those. I stepped back out of the camera's halo and went to the welcome table where my cake sat like a newborn among Doritos disguised as artisan chips. The red USB worried me more than the cake now. I pressed it into my purse to keep it from becoming part of a display. The cake, I had told myself, could be sliced later in my kitchen in silence. The USB was the thing that mattered. The digitized VHS tapes of Daniel in red pajamas, the way his father's off-camera voice fills a room he no longer can. The cake was sugar and cinnamon and the feel of my mother's mixing spoon in my hand. The USB was a key to a house that keeps us safe. Mom, Daniel said. And there he was. Close. Finally. He smells like cedar and pepper from some cologne Ashley bought him. His mouth is already at sorry. And I hate that word on him. Happy 35, I said, and I pulled him into me for a heartbeat. His chest against mine was the way I measure time. He let himself be held and then let go, the way he's practiced since 19. I'm sorry about the mic, I added, though I wasn't. He shook his head, eyes flicking to Ashley, then to the guy in the hoodie saying something about work. It's fine. It's just, there's a flow. Ashley's done a lot. He gave me his old grin then, because he remembered who taught him to soften blows. You look good.
That way nothing gets, lost.
I know when to fight on the hill and when to go home and put the kettle on. I could have left then, but there was that card-slick light on the bar that said hosted by Ashley, and it told the truth of what this was. Not a party, but a presentation. And I am not an aunt who shows up once a year. I am not a guest in my own motherhood. So I found the manager, a bearded man with kind eyes and a wedding ring he twisted when people yelled. I won't be long, I said. But I need to ask a favor. If your kitchen can cut this cake into staff slices, not for guests. I put a folded 20 in his hand because kindness needs feet to move. It would save me from explaining why it came home untouched. And if I reached into my purse, the USB warm from my hands. If you could plug this into whatever screen you have to make sure it plays, just for me to check it works, I'll take it right back. No need to show it. My throat closed. He saw that. He nodded. I've got a pile down in the office, he said, wordlessly taking the cake toward the kitchen. I'll check the stick now. He glanced at Ashley, then back at me, like a man who's watched brides cry in bathrooms and knows where the real ceremony. I moved away from the glare of the ring light and toward the edge of the patio where the planted boxwoods tried to pretend we were somewhere fancy. That's where the clipboard girl found me again, her voice soft. I'm sorry, she said. I just say what they tell me. I'm Claire. I'm 23. My mom lives in Ohio. She replaced the iPad with a coaster under a sweating glass, relief in doing something simple. While the clinks and murmurs rose and fell like a tide, I kept to the edges. That's where you learn things. I watched Ashley float to a cluster of women who looked like podcast headshots made flesh. Fine knit sets, fresh blowouts, a consensus about oat milk. Brand partners, I heard one of them say. Deliverables, another nodded. Ashley's laugh, a flute emptied too fast, tinkled high. The Copper Fox is giving us the space in exchange for tags, she said. So, yeah, we can't, feature outside food. It's a whole vibe. We're doing the announcement later. Mark's wife was there too, bouncing the baby with one arm and forking a melon ball with the other. Adults only vibe, Ashley had texted. The baby's eyes were wide and solemn. He stared at me like we were the only two rational creatures there. I made a face. He grinned. Drool purled on his lip. Ashley had told me adults only and then allowed her friends their infants, their exceptions. Why? Because they fit the aesthetic. Neutral muslins, delicate voices, no one to remind the room that motherhood is a thing that has ragged edges and sauce on the shoulder. When I walked Daisy, my neighbor's toddlers waved at us with sticky hands. That's a world I know. This was a set. Margaret, a woman said softly at my elbow. It was Denise from choir, of all people. I hadn't seen her slip in. She's friends with the Copper Fox manager's wife. You okay? Her eyes held that complicated expression women save for each other in public, half amusement, half apology. I'm learning, I said. About what? Could you keep it in the office? I'll get it when I go to my car. One of Ashley's friends, a sharp brunette with eyebrows like a rule book, put her phone on the welcome table, knocked a plate off balance, and my Springsteen slid off the table onto the wood. The edge of the wrapping split. The corner of the album showed old and true, the sleeve worn soft where my thumb had ridden it for years. I was halfway across the patio to pick it up when Ashley's own hand landed on it first. She lifted it like a prop and turned it outward, the crowd ready for show and tell. This, she said with a glittering laugh, is very vintage. She drew out the syllables like taffy. We're curating Daniel's space to be lighter, less heavy nostalgia energy, you know? She glanced at the camera phone. My followers always say, we don't need to live in the past to honor it. People like to call that stoic, but I know it's paralysis. Margaret knows. Ashley went on, now addressing me without turning. We've had so many good conversations about boundaries. She set the Springsteen back on the table, not noticing a smear of hummus whitening the cellophane. So, yeah, gifts later off-site. Her smile was as cool as the hummus. We'll filter. I told myself to find a yes small enough to swallow. I'll take it home, I said, reaching for the album. Ashley's hand landed on it too, perfectly outmaneuvering me. She didn't grip. She just covered it, like a hand on a mouth. You know, Margaret, she said in a half-whisper that somehow carried. I read this piece on how our children don't owe us a front-row seat to their lives or a backstage pass, and it was so freeing. She smiled into my stunned face. You'd love it. But the universe wanted me to know the measure of this woman before it let me build a strategy. The manager, bless him, gestured me toward his office door just off the patio. He cracked it so I could see the small screen on his desk where my slideshow played in silence. And there, large as life, was Daniel falling off a sled into a snowbank, popping up with snow in his lashes, his father's voice off-screen saying, "You're okay, bud. I got you." My breath went in and didn't come out. Behind me, Ashley's voice was brisk. "Where'd the thing go?" she asked the caterer, The thing? Something about her felt like a lighthouse. We can put it somewhere. Discreet, Ashley went on. Like the back. Compostable, of course. She added numbly, as if the appearance of caring was the same as kindness. We can't compost eggs, the caterer said, droll. City rules. You want me to slice it some? She murmured. For the back? Staff will love it. Liability. Nuts. Dairy, she said. She lowered her voice like she was sharing state secrets. Also, she wants the mom thing not visible. I put another 20 on the counter, humiliating that I felt like I was bribing someone to accept a gift, and squeezed her forearm in gratitude when her eyes flicked to the cash and then back up with an almost smile. Glossy hair rolled her eyes like the fact that I had a relationship with money was tacky. I stepped back out onto the patio, very still. If you stand still enough, people reveal themselves in relief. Ashley had the halo light trained on her, Daniel at her shoulder. She raised her glass. We have something to share, she trilled, the room pulling in. We've been keeping a little secret. We got the cutest craftsman in Austin. And she looked at Daniel, conspiratorial. We're finally starting over with a new last name. I'm updating my brand to Ash and Dan Monroe. She lit on the last name like a butterfly on a bitter plant. It's cleaner, more accessible. Our team thinks it tests better. A couple of people glanced at me because someone always thinks of the mother in the room even if nobody wants to be her. My hands had gone entirely cold. Daniel stepped forward then, toward the mic. He cleared his throat. It's just a name, he said, looking at me like I was class and he was unprepared. It's for security and we want a private life and it came out steadier than I felt. Ashley laughed lightly, instructing the others to laugh too. We're not erasing anything, she said. We're building something. New season, new vibe. You get it. She wanted control, and she wanted the credit, and she wanted to hold Daniel up like an object she has polished. I opened my mouth, and then a voice behind me, a man with a trimmed beard and expensive shoes, said audibly, "Good for them." His mom was probably smothering. He told me she still buys him cake. Can you imagine? The kind of man who uses women's kindness as the reason to cut them. I turned to look at him and recognized his face from Ashley's Instagram. Their real estate agent. The one she tags in properties like their picnic baskets. He caught my eye and did not look away. He smiled and lifted his glass like we shared a joke. That was microaggression as art. I need a minute, I heard myself say. And I walked. My legs remembering how, to the side gate where the Copper Fox keeps its dumpsters and the pale herb planters that smell like last year's summer. The night air felt like a cold hand on a hot forehead. I put my palm on the chain link and closed my eyes. I called Loretta. Loretta is my neighbor with a backyard full of plastic flamingos and an ex-husband who still brings over firewood when the nights drop below 40. She and I walk Daisy when our hips allow, and we sit on my porch with 2 lawn chairs and the world on pause. She answered on the first ring. If you're calling me from a jail cell, she said, I need to change out of my bathrobe. I keep thinking about the red USB, telling people things. About me, that I'm smothering, that I ruin things. She said something about guest lists and contracts and her followers. And Daniel, he just stood there. He didn't stop it. He said it's just a name. She calls it Boundaries Are Sexy. She's doing a whole episode about reparenting ourselves, and Daniel is her first guest. He hasn't told me. He's never told me anything if she tells him not to. That's who he is now. We are doing family photos, and I want to clarify the misunderstanding so nobody gets it wrong. Her civility was a white tile covering a moldy wall. Go collect your USB. Loretta whispered in my ear. Hold your spine. I'll stay on the phone. I locked it in the drawer just now. He hesitated. He was not a gossip. He had the look of a man who refuses to be weaponized. They asked for it. I said it was mine. Family photo, she chirped. Just immediate. Daniel and me. She glanced at me, then let her gaze slip to a woman beside her, her sister-in-law maybe from her side, who smirked. Margaret, why don't you take it? You can be part of it that way. She held out a phone. It glinted like a thrown coin in a pond. Heads turned. My cheeks went hot in the way they have not since I was a girl picked last in gym. The small humiliations compound like interest if you let them. I'll pass, I said simple. Photographers should photograph. Mothers should stand with their sons. I started to step toward them. Ashley's nails tightened on Daniel's shoulder. She put out her other hand like she was stopping traffic. "Oh, I think we're doing just us," she said. She did the thing she does when she needs to make a knife look like a manicure. She dropped her voice, turned to me, and made her eyes shiny. "It's just that, well, Daniel told me he wanted his birthday to feel like his, with his chosen family. Not the ones who, you know." She let the sentence trail like a trap. "He's been really brave about boundaries. We love that for him. He asked me to keep the list clean." She took a breath and smiled harder. "It's not for you." Then my body did. The plate of bones in my chest rattled, then locked. I looked at my son, and he was a boy again for half a second. Mouth open, eyes pleading, "Don't make me choose." How many women have been asked to be generous at the exact moment generosity will annihilate them? "Did you?" I said to him quietly. The room receded. It was just us, the way it had been in the hospital when he took his first breath, and I thought, how will I keep you safe in a world that doesn't deserve you? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it. "I told Ashley I wanted a small party," he said, eyes on the wood between us. I didn't think about, she's better at the lists. I didn't tell her not to." He ran out of words. He looked at Ashley with gratitude for rescuing him. He looked at me like a beggar for forgiveness. He looked down to the floor because gravity is when you have done the thing you said you'd never do. And then Ashley smiled like the cat that gets fed for bringing in the dead bird. "He didn't want mom energy," she said, that phrase again, like a joke we all agreed was funny. "It makes him tight. He said so." She took my son's slight frustration in a particular week and turned it into a lifetime sentence. And she said it in front of his friends and her phones, and my God, I felt my back straighten in a way it hasn't since I told a classroom of 12-year-olds to sit down, and they did. I looked at Ashley, and then at the room, and then at Daniel. "Here's something true," I said, not using the mic because the room was a bell and I was the striking. "You can decide which person in this story you want to be. You can be the woman who throws away cakes people bake with their hands. You can be the person who labels love as too much because it doesn't come in a neutral palette. And you..." I looked at Daniel, and he flinched because he's afraid of disappointing me the way men in our family are afraid of acts of God. "You can choose a new name and a new state and a new idea of yourself. I will not stop loving you for any of those choices. I will not perform decency to make your wife's followers think she's a genius at family systems. I will be your mother in the ways that don't get brand deals. Please do not put my dead husband's words into your content unless you are ready for me to reply." I turned then, not because I liked exits, but because I know when a scene is done. I was almost to the edge when the universe provided the last proof I needed of what I am up against. I glanced back, just once, toward the kitchen to see if the caterer had managed to smuggle plates of cake to the dishwashers. The swinging door was ajar, and through it I saw Ashley's assistant, glossy hair, scooping my cake into a black trash bag with a spatula. The red note I had taped to the lid for Daniel, "For you to take home, love, Mom," was stuck to her wrist, frosting clinging to the ink. She scraped my cinnamon and cream cheese like she was cleaning a windshield. Daniel's name on the balloon I'd brought bobbed above the trash, the helium losing its conviction. That was the betrayal you can hold in your hands, the throwing away of the thing I made, not because it was dangerous, but because it didn't match the feed. I turned back toward the room, and there, finally, was the offense said plain. Ashley had moved closer, for the camera probably. She smiled with her eyes dead as a shark. "You're not family anymore," she said, low and cool, a line cooked in therapy and served cold. "You're extended." Something in me that has been a soup for months hardened like caramel left out. There is a pleasure in the clarity of being named an enemy when you were trying to be a witness. Behind me, I felt a presence warm and close. Claire, the clipboard girl, whispered, "Do you want me to walk you out?" Her hand didn't touch me. These children are careful, but the offer was a hand. "I can walk myself," I said. "But thank you." I pulled the foil plate from my bag and pressed it into Claire's hands. "For your mother in Ohio," I said. "Tell her a woman in California baked it." Outside, the air smelled like yeast and rosemary and the particular clean that comes after you know what the fight is. I stepped into the parking lot lights. They made the dent on my driver's side fender look like a bruise on a shin. I sat in the driver's seat. Daisy's blue tennis ball rolled from under the passenger seat like a reminder that the world includes animals who love for sport, not spectacle. I put my forehead on the cool of the steering wheel and let the tears come like a leak finally found and mended. Loretta's voice was still on the line. A string stretched back to my porch. "You did good?" she asked. "I did not do harm," I said. "I taught a lesson some of them will pretend not to learn." Behind me, the patio's laughter lapped like a shallow pool. On my passenger seat, the Springsteen album lay like a compass. In my bag, the red USB hummed with the power of the lives inside it. And somewhere inside that building, a woman with gold heels and sharp teeth mistook fear for power and miscounted her enemies. I started the engine. The Copper Fox sign flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the bar, a song changed. It wasn't Springsteen. It was someone with a synth and a way of saying nothing like it was everything. I pulled out past the dumpsters and didn't look. Not at the trash bag, not at the helium, not at the halo ring. I drove toward Loretta's porch light, the one she never turns off, the one that says home to anyone who can read it. I didn't know every move I'd make after tonight, but I knew a few things. I would take the names off the boxes in my garage and not apologize for nostalgia. I would call my lawyer and ask about powers of attorney and what it means to have your son change his name without telling you. I would go to church Sunday and sing louder than I have in months. I would let myself be angry, clean angry, not the kind that eats you. I would invite Claire and the caterer over for stew. I would label my red USB like the holy thing it is and make 3 copies in case the world got careless again. I would not cower before a girl who thinks boundaries are a way to scaffold an audience. Back at my house, the porch light glowed. The hydrangeas I'd planted the spring after my husband died looked skeletal against the night. On the hall table, a stack of mail rested under a magnet shaped like a chicken. This house has a bowl on the counter for keys that Daniel painted in 3rd grade. Crooked thumbs pressed into clay like imprints of time. The house is the object Ashley wants to pretend doesn't exist. It's too full of us. The house is the concept I will not let her have. It is not a product. I set the Springsteen on the kitchen island and peeled the cellophane, wiping away the hummus with a damp paper towel. I held it to my chest for one long breath and then set it aside. Then I took the red USB out of my bag like a midwife pulling new life. I plugged it into my laptop. The little light blinked like pulse. On the screen, Daniel at 5 in his Batman cape charged the backyard, cape trailing like a comet, his father's voice laughing in the frame. "You're okay, bud. I got you." That, I thought, is what she will never understand. I am the person who said I got you and meant it even when it didn't make me look good. I am the person who will say it again, even if he moves to Austin and calls himself Monroe and forgets how to use a porch light. I am the woman who baked a cake and was told it was not for them. The trick is to remember it was never for them in the first place. It was for him. It was for me. It was for the part of the world that still wants sweetness without a caption. The kettle whistled. I turned it off and then turned it back on and poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a mug anyways, because tonight is not tea. Daisy, sensing ritual, put her chin on my knee. "We are okay," I told her, and she thumped her tail once in agreement. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Claire from the Copper Fox. Sorry if this is weird. I thought you should know. After you left, Ashley told the photographer to crop you if you were in any shots, and she told people you crashed. But the manager said she changed the guest list after sending invites. I just wanted you to know you weren't crazy. Thank you," I typed. "You have a mother who raised you right. If you ever want carrot cake, I bake on Sundays." She sent back a heart. It glowed like a tail light disappearing down a safe road. I scrolled then, bravely, to Ashley's Instagram out of habit, formed by a need to know what others say about my life. There it was. A grid post. The halo light doing its mercenary job. Daniel and Ashley, cheek to cheek. Her caption, 35 and thriving. Chose my family, chose my name, chose my life. And swipe. Our announcement. The comments poured, "So proud of you. Boundaries, queen. Protect your peace." She had posted before I reached my driveway, probably drafted in notes days ago. I looked for Daniel's eyes in the photo. They were shiny. You could read that as joy or as grief if you knew the language. I put the phone face down. I let the bourbon warm my throat. I looked at the USB blinking, the icon open, my boy's life in a folder named Dan 35 like a small redemption no one could rebrand. Grace with a backbone I had promised. That is the only way through the people who mistake force for love. Grace is the speech I gave with the mic. Backbone is making 6 copies of the USB and calling a lawyer in the morning. Grace is telling my son I love him no matter his last name. Backbone is refusing to let a woman who counts clicks tell him who his mother is. Tonight was the oppression. Tonight showed me the shape of it. Tomorrow I will draft my own announcement. Not for her followers, but for my son, and for the part of me that nearly shrank to fit into a picture. I lifted my mug in the kitchen, alone, to the sound of thunder far away that might have been a garbage truck, to the honk of a car on the street, to the bark of Daisy at a leaf that had the nerve to blow in, to the women who know how to be a picture frame, and also the wall, I said, to the red USB, and to the cake that fed a kitchen full of tired feet who will remember the taste when they are old. Out the window, Loretta's porch light flickered once like a wink. I took that as a benediction. This party, I thought, isn't for me. But my life is. And no one there will ever forget that I held the mic and told the truth before anyone else got to put a filter on it. The bourbon found the place between my ribs that grief leaves open and warm. I let it sit there and do the job whiskey has done for Irish women longer than the internet has been alive. Daisy huffed and flopped, her sigh like a tiny accordion deflating. The house settled around me with the creaks of wood that has watched a boy get tall and a woman learn how to eat alone. I could have let the night end there under the honorable, old-fashioned terms of knowing something and sleeping on it. My phone buzzed face down on the counter, an insect under glass. I didn't look at it. Then it buzzed again, a longer fit, then again so quickly that the vibrations walked the phone to the lip of the island. I flipped it over because when you've been a mother for 35 years, you cannot not look. The first was a text from an unknown number with the same corporate politeness as a dental reminder. Hi, Margaret. This is Riley, the couples coach for Ashley and Daniel. We support them in boundary work. Do you have 5 minutes tonight for a quick repair call? The goal is to align narratives. The second was Ashley herself. Photo of her glass raised at the Copper Fox and this message. So proud of us tonight. Tough moments, but good growth. Can we sync on a couple of deliverables? Need your okay to use some of Daniel's childhood footage in a quick reel tomorrow. And let's clean up the angle on the cake thing. People will get confused. You good to own that you surprised us? Light and grateful tone. LMK. The third was just a Venmo ping. Ashley Monroe paid you $75, 00. Note. Cake. I stared at the blue check mark next to that message like it had personally slandered my mother. I didn't touch it. The phone vibrated again. Daniel, at last. A string of dots becoming words and then retreating like a tide. Hey, tonight was a lot. Ash wants to come by in the morning with some stuff we left at your place last week. Is that okay? We can swing by at 10? Also, can I grab the USB? The manager said you had one. The red stick glowed from inside my bag like an ember. We've located the hostage, I said to Daisy. She thumped her tail once in sympathy and then unhelpfully licked her paw. I put the phone face down again and went to the sink to run water over the Springsteen sleeve. The hummus came off, but a smear of oil remained. That's the thing about evidence. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just a transparent stain that will catch the light if you tilt it. I typed to Daniel, "Tomorrow isn't good. I'm teaching." Which was technically a lie. School is out for summer. But I am a woman who has taught for 35 years. Nothing I wrote was wholly false. As to the USB, no. It stays with me for now. We can talk about it when we can talk. The dots appeared, jittered, disappeared. Finally, K. And then, Ash says it's better to get the assets centralized before the move. Her editor can handle it. Assets. He meant his childhood. He meant my husband's laugh in the background of a Halloween where Daniel insisted on being both a vampire and a baseball player, and we obliged with a cape and eye black. He meant the years when we were poor enough that I cut his hair myself, and he went to school with a cowlick on picture day. The years that I was who you called when your brakes scraped. They were assets to be centralized. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb like I was putting a lid on a pot and glanced at the digital clock on the stove. 10:37. I could call no one but Loretta, and Loretta would tell me to sleep and then be at my door at 9:59 in slippers with flamingos on them out of solidarity. I set the mug in the sink and opened the drawer where we keep rubber bands and takeout menus and 6 keys we can no longer place. I found an old manila envelope from a science fair we did in 2004 and slid the USB inside, then wrote in Sharpie across the flap, "Do not touch." In parentheses, because I am me, I added, "Not even if you think it's for the best." I threw on a sweater, ran a hand through my hair, checked my face for errant bourbon remorse, none, and went to the kitchen. Ashley stood on my porch at 10 on the dot in a pair of pale trousers tailored within an inch of their lives and a cardigan the color of a latte that required a pickup code. Beside her, not behind her, was Daniel, in a t-shirt and a face he wears when he is bracing. He has always hated early mornings. You can tell when he is tired because he forgets to arrange his features for public. Behind them stood a man with an iPad, 40-ish, chinos that were somehow both casual and proprietary. He looked like every leadership coach in a co-working space. On the bottom step, perched like a bridesmaid, was glossy hair, now with a clipboard and a reusable water bottle with stickers that said things like, "Hold space and monetize authenticity." My blue hydrangeas looked like an apology bouquet they didn't bring. "Good morning," Ashley chirped in the voice she uses on stories. "We thought we'd pop by quickly. We have a hard out at 11. They complied. A small victory that would not show up on any of Ashley's grid posts. They filed into the kitchen, and the house did that thing where it takes the measure of visitors the way dogs do. The iPad man looked around in a way that said inventory. Ashley looked around like a set designer. Daniel looked around at everything except me. "Coffee?" I asked, because I am not a monster. Also because it gave me something to put in my hands to keep them from throttling another woman on a weekday morning. "We brought our own," Ashley sang, lifting her silver thermos like a Eucharist. "We just want to connect, get on the same page." She glanced at the man. "This is Riley. He's our couples coach and our family systems consultant. We used to use the word cruel, but I understand vocabulary changes. We've drafted what we call a boundary agreement for the new season," he said. "Think of it like a useful container. We're requesting that you don't show up at future events without explicit invite. That includes any move-related things or content days. 2. We're asking that you channel all communication to Daniel through me for the next 6 months so we can avoid triangulation. 3. We'd love your formal blessing on the name update. We've drafted a quote from you for my caption for later today. It's heartfelt and natural. You'll just have to post it too. 4. We need to gather and centralize family assets for security and to curate the narrative. So we'd like any analog or digital media, photos, VHS tapes, USBs, transferred to us by Friday. Our team will catalog. 5. To avoid legal confusion, we've included a small NDA. Basically, you agree not to share or monetize family content or negative stories about us. It's win-win. She looked up with that bright benevolence people put on when they're about to ask you to cede the land grant your great-grandfather built by hand. Oh, and just so we're all safe with brand partners, there's a clause about not using the O'Connor name in a way that suggests affiliation with us without prior approval. Because we've moved on, you know? Clean slate, new vibe. Riley slid a pen toward me like a magician revealing a dove. Daniel wouldn't look at the paper. He rubbed his thumb and forefinger together like he had sap on them. He was wearing the watch his father gave him when he turned 21, and I hated that too. That he wore something true into a room full of people with scripted souls. Also, Ashley added, as if remembering to ask if I'd take a coat for her. "House stuff. I know this is, sensitive. But long-term, it would make a lot of sense to liquidate this place and downsize. Streamline. You know." She gestured at my knees with a little waggle that I think meant old. "And a yard is a lot. Real talk? The market is softening. If you wanted intros to our realtor, he's incredible." She beamed like she'd offered me a coupon for 10% off grief. "Do you mean?" I said very quietly so the words would stay tidy and she couldn't say I yelled, "Sell my house?" "There's a section at the end called longer-term considerations," he said, scrolling. "We don't need to solve those today. The immediate are the comms and content. Is there a bullet point where they agree not to use my dead husband's voice in content that sells collagen? Or does repair only happen in one direction on your flowchart? But for right now, we need to sign off on the... I will not be your villain. I will not forward my love through you like an email draft because you think you are a server that can hold people. I will not give you the red USB with the only copy of my husband's voice. I will not post the words you wrote for me about my own son. I will not sell my house because a man on your Instagram thinks it's time to streamline. I will not refrain from using my own last name. I will not call my granddaughter somebody else's idea of what a grandmother should be." I paused. "Oh, look, I don't even have a granddaughter. That's how far ahead you are in your narrative. You don't understand how brutal the internet is. We don't want you to get hurt. You are writing contracts and calling it love. You are harvesting trauma and calling it content. You are... It makes his nose red all day. Dan, I said, and I hadn't called him Dan since he told me I could stop calling him Danny. The word felt like I'd taken a hand off a railing. Did you tell your wife to draft a quote from me about being proud of you changing your name? Did you ask me to say those exact words? Or did you let her draft a story because it was easier than calling your mother? We thought, he said, and I could hear the "we" like a pilot's voice from a cockpit. We thought it would be easier on you if it was done. I didn't want you to feel like you had to give us permission. I could feel it catch their clothes like wind. If you want the O'Connor story to be a prelude, that's your right, but you do not get to rename the authors. This is about safety. We need the USB, she said, the pitch of her voice going hard like the edge of a stainless pan. We need to make sure you don't do something impulsive with it. People do that when they're activated. We'll give it back. She held her hands out, palms up, jewelry gleaming. Promise. You could have had me as your ally, I said to Ashley, because if we were going to tell the truth, we might as well tell the best version of it. You could have had a woman who knows how to call a manager and make them do the right thing without anyone thinking less of themselves. You could have had a person who discovered self-esteem inside a public school with a half-broken copier and a budget that said, use what you have. You could have had Sunday Stew and a person you could leave a baby with. You chose to have an antagonist because antagonists make better content. That is your right, but don't pretend it's therapy. Your wife is trying to raffle off your past to build a present that fits on a screen. She is telling you I am dangerous because my love isn't neat. She is making lists, and she thinks she can put me on one marked extended. She is wrong. I lifted the envelope slightly so he could see the label I had written in Sharpie as if legal spells were that easy. This is your father's voice. I let you borrow it for 35 years. I am not putting it in the cloud, so a 22-year-old with a ring light can color grade it. My hand landed on hers and I pressed down. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to say you are not taking from my kitchen counter what you threw in a trash bag when it didn't match your palette. Don't, I said. Do not put your hand on my things in my house and call it help. You're scaring me. You do that, he said. And there it was, the offense that lives in sons who marry women who tell them they can start over. You make everything heavy. Heavy is who picks up the thing that needs to be carried because someone has to. Heavy is love's other name when you aren't using it as marketing. Then I will put it down, I said, very calm, and I set the envelope not in the middle of the counter, but in the drawer with the rubber bands and the takeout menus and the junk keys that still find work sometimes. I closed the drawer with a soft click that might as well have been a gavel. I am not giving you the USB. I am not signing your NDA. I will not say the words you wrote for me. I will do one thing, though. I opened it and took out his father's folded flag, and the deed to this house and a handful of photos of Daniel with tinfoil Viking armor we made during a rainy summer when the cousins were in town. I set the envelope in with those things, closed the safe, and spun the dial again until the click settled on nothing. This house keeps our names, I said. Not you. We can get a court order, she said. You can't just keep shared assets. Daniel is in the videos. He was a minor. That's joint consent. My lawyer. Also, and I want you to hear this because your church might not have told you, your husband's dead father is not a brand. You do not get to license him. You will not be in our holidays or our announcements. We will cut contact if you keep this up. You won't see future children. Don't do it by pretending it's for my good. I put the flag back in the safe and closed it for the second time. The click sounded like a point of no return because it was one. Mom, Daniel whispered, and I knew what he was asking. Make it smaller so I don't have to choose. Just sign it. We're at an impasse. My recommendation is a pause. We can send the doc, you can consult your people, and we can regroup in a week. In the meantime, it would be helpful if you don't post anything inflammatory. Our ask stands about not contacting Daniel directly. We'd like to keep communication with Ashley. I make stew and things that taste like childhood and not enlightenment. You can text me directly any hour of any day. If you change your number and I find out on the internet, I will assume you are in a cult and call the police. Your father's tools will still be in the garage, and if you intend to change your name and live in a Craftsman in Austin, you ought to learn how to use a level. Names are hung straight. What you want is to go without consequence. Ashley glanced around at the crock with Daniel's third-grade handprints on it, at the framed picture of him at 14 with acne and terrible hair standing next to his father with the same grin. She looked like a woman in a museum who realizes none of this is for sale. She pulled her cardigan tight like a fort and said flatly, "We tried." His lips were cold. He smelled like cedar and pepper and desperation. "I'll call you," he murmured, the lie that lovers and sons tell. "I'll make stew," I said. Tuesday. "Do you have a mother?" When there were no more tears at that moment, this is key, there will always be more, I stood. I washed the single mug and dried it and put it back in the cabinet because small order is how you keep from slipping. I pulled the boundary agreement out of the folder with the tasteful eucalyptus and looked at it on my table. The font was pretty. The bullets were aggressive. I took a pen and wrote across the first page in my teacher printing. "No." Then I wrote a second sentence. "If you use my husband's voice or image in monetized content, I will pursue every legal remedy available." Then, because Irish women have humor as a survival tool, I drew a little shamrock. I scanned it with the app my union taught me to use for grievances. Then I emailed it to Ashley and Daniel, and, because I am not an idiot, BCC'd Loretta and Denise from choir and my cousin Moira, who lives in Boston, but has the kind of blood that knows how to draft a threat that sounds like a lullaby. In the subject, I wrote, "Margaret's boundary." In the body, I wrote, "Attached, please find my boundary. Love, Mom." Before I could shut the laptop, another email arrived like a gift from the future. A note from the Copper Fox manager, subject, "Video." The body. "If you ever want to play it here on a Tuesday afternoon when no one's around, projector's yours. Staff says hi. Also the carrot cake? Legendary. We put Fizzalis on it because our dessert guy got sentimental." Attached was a photo taken in the kitchen last night of the dishwasher line. 6 tired people with slices of my cake balanced on upturned mixing bowls, plastic crowns from some bachelorette party stuck on their heads for fun, their smiles uncurated and wide. In the lower right corner, the edge of a black trash bag. In the upper cloud of the picture, flour dusted like holy ash. I let that image replace the one of glossy hair scooping my cake into black plastic. You can choose which picture is the one you keep. That is also a power. My phone lit up again. A DM on Instagram from a woman I didn't know. "Hi, I'm a follower of Ashley's. I was at the Copper Fox. I didn't know you were Daniel's mom. I'm sorry if I laughed at something that wasn't funny. You made me think about my own mom. She lives in Bakersfield. Do you have the carrot cake recipe? My mother would love it." I typed back, "Of course. Sundays, bring a container. And your mom if she'll come." Then, because rebellion needs paperwork and a pot, I did 2 things. I dialed the number of an attorney a parent from my school had recommended once for an estate question, and left a message. "I'm calling about intellectual property around home videos and the misuse of a deceased person's voice." And then I took the stew meat out of the freezer to thaw, because no one changes a family system on an empty stomach. At noon, Loretta let herself in with a bag of grocery store lilies and a bottle of bourbon like a common thief of joy. She glanced at the boundary agreement on the table, read the first page, and snorted so hard she scared Daisy. "You signed?" she asked. "I wrote in the margins," I said. "My favorite place." We sat at the patio table while Daisy sniffed at the one hydrangea blossom that had the courage to open fully. We made a list that looked like this: lawyer, IP, name, estate. Copies. Make 3 of the red USB and put them in different safes. Bank. Check beneficiaries and POA. I had thought this last night. It felt less like panic now and more like flossing. The caterer with the lighthouse eyes. Loretta's ex-husband only if he brings wood. Letter to Daniel. Handwritten, not text. Church. Sunday. Sing. Album. Frame the Springsteen sleeve with the pencil note. Hang it in the hall. Instagram. Do nothing for now. By 3 o'clock, I had driven to the Staples, that great cathedral of middle-class resilience, and bought 2 more fireproof safes, 6 USB sticks with more gigabytes than I have opinions, a ream of paper I intend to always have even though we are paperless now, and a pack of thank you cards with small lemons on the front. I had copied the red USB 3 times and labeled them like they were newborns. Dan 35-1, Dan 35-2, Dan 35-3. I had texted Claire the address and the word stew. She sent back 4 exclamation points and then 1, as if to correct her enthusiasm into something a brand would approve. I had left a voicemail for the caterer at the number on her Yelp page. "You don't know me, but you sliced my cake and I am your friend for life. Tuesday?" At 5, the email arrived from Ashley's lawyer. all crisp headers and a signature block longer than a sonnet. It was a cease and desist not for me, that would come later, I am sure, but for my feelings. It suggested that if I shared defamatory narratives, I would face consequences. I printed it and put it in the folder with the lemons. I wrote on it with a purple pen. Okay. At 6, Daniel called. Not a text. My phone rang with his ringtone I don't know how to change, the default that sounds like a particularly delicate alarm clock. I let it ring twice because I am not a Labrador retriever. I swiped. Hi. For not telling you about the name until it was public, he said, very soft. That was wrong. I thought it would be easier. It was cruelty dressed up like efficiency. You will cry because of sulfur instead of because a woman told you your mother isn't family. Tell her not to take my things, not to write my sentences, not to threaten me with imagined babies. Tell her to stop cutting women out of rooms and calling it boundaries. And if you can't tell her now, tell her later. But know that I am going to hold the line for you until you remember how. I took 2 because that's how many fit in my hand. Back at the house, I put them in a bowl and put the bowl on the table under the window, the one that looks out on the hydrangeas. The lemons glowed like yeses. At 8, I wrote a letter to my son. I wrote it on paper, because paper has a weight that screens can't simulate. I wrote about the day I took him to the DMV on his 16th birthday, and how the clerk told him, "You'll always be O'Connor unless you change it in ink," and how he smirked at me to soften the omen. I wrote about the first time he moved out, and the way the space in the house changed shape, and how I learned to listen to the sound of my own breathing in the dark. I wrote that he can call himself Monroe or Everest or Blue. I will still answer to Mom. I wrote that love is heavy because it carries things. I wrote that if he wants to be light, he can borrow my wings. I wrote that Ashley is not my enemy, but she is my problem. I wrote that I will fight with him if I have to, and for him forever. I wrote that he owes me nothing but the truth. I put the letter in an envelope and wrote Daniel on the front in my teacher handwriting, the only handwriting I have. I didn't put a stamp on it. I would give it to him with stew. I put it beneath the safe because sometimes it is good to put softness under the thing that keeps the fire out. By 10, the house was quiet, except for the gentle tick of the kitchen clock I've had since 1992. I turned my phone off. Really off, not just night mode. I put the red USB's copies in the new safes and tucked one in Loretta's ridiculous flamingo yard, under the base of a bird with a bent leg. I locked my doors not out of fear, but out of respect for the night. Somewhere in Austin, a craftsman house with a brand new shiplap wall was waiting for my son's laughter. Somewhere in my neighborhood, Claire was telling her mother in Ohio about a woman who pressed a slice of cake into her hand and called it love. Somewhere in a kitchen at the Copper Fox, a dishwasher finished a shift and went home with a story about a cake you wouldn't believe. Somewhere in the dark, Ashley held her phone above her face and scrolled through comments that tried to fill the room that real conversation leaves quiet. I lay down with Daisy at my feet and thought about the difference between being extended and extending. One is a demotion. The other is an offering. I thought about teachers. I thought about girls who learn to put eucalyptus on folders to make them look like church. I thought about men who think they can curate grief. I thought about how, once in 7th grade, I told a boy to sit down and he did. And then he wrote me a note 10 years later and said, "I'm alive because you made me sit down." I thought about the key bowl on the counter with Daniel's thumbprints in the clay. I thought about the weight of things and the lightness of lemons and the sound of a safe locking. Tomorrow there will be replies and replies to replies. There will be a waiting email from the attorney and 3 voicemails from Ashley, one tearful, one angry, and one that tries to be breezy and fails. There will be a text from Riley suggesting a new plan and one from Glossy Hair that says, "If you were triggered last night, that's on you." There will be a post on Ashley's grid with a caption that uses words like moving through and honoring and new chapter, and a photo of 2 mugs with an ampersand on the table. There will be comments. There will always be comments. Tonight, there is no comment section. Tonight, there is a safe with a red USB in it, and a house that remembers who lives here, and a woman who said no in her own kitchen, and walked a dog and put stew meat in the sink to thaw. It is not a hero story. It is something better. It is a woman choosing her own next sentence. No edits. And if you are wondering whether anyone will believe me over a woman with a ring light and a pretty font and a coach, I will tell you this. Denise from choir texted me at 11:11, a screenshot of Ashley's latest story with a gif of a woman rolling her eyes and the word enough. The caterer sent me a photo of her forearm with a flowery fingerprint on it and a caption, Tuesday. Remy from the Copper Fox DM'd me a line. Next trivia night, category is Springsteen. Bring the mic. That's the thing about sparks. You don't have to coax them. You just have to give them air. I fell asleep with the window open and dreamt of a backyard full of children in capes running through sprinklers, their waterlogged sneakers squeaking, their mothers yelling, "Be careful," and making lemonade with too much sugar and no one taking a picture. I woke to the silence that comes before the day breaks and thought, I did not hurt anyone. I did not give up the thing I made with my hands. I did not let a woman with good hair tell me where to set my own table. I am still his mother. That is the contract that needs no signature. And when the knock comes again, I will ask, shoes off. And when the demand comes again, I will say no. And when my son remembers, he will knock too. And when he forgets, I will cook stew. And on Tuesdays, I will put 2 extra bowls out, just in case. In the morning, before the emails, before the freshly curated apology post, I slid the letter for Daniel into my purse and walked to the Copper Fox with the Springsteen album under my arm. The manager looked up and smiled like a man who knows a ritual when he sees one. "Projector?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I thought I'd check the sound. For later." That's as close to a benediction as you get when the priest is a missing man and your congregation is the utter ordinary of a Tuesday night. I let it wash over me like the sound of a safe closing and the click of a boundary being what it is, a line that keeps the right things in. I walked back out into the sunlight. The day smelled like lemons someone had left in a bowl and the clean breath of a kitchen that fed its own. Behind me, the Copper Fox hummed. In front of me, the street was what it had always been. Cracked, true, unbranded. I took a step toward home. The spark was already aflame. The spark was already aflame. I could feel it under my skin now, something that was not anger alone, but a kind of steady heat that told me I was allowed to be more than reactive, that I could be deliberate. I slept badly that night because the mind finds plans in the dark, and plans, even the tender ones, make small noises. In the morning, I had coffee, and then I had the attorney. Her name was Janine Flores. She had a silver streak in her hair the way a street map has a bright line for a river. And when she smiled, you trusted that smile because it was measured like a ledger. Loretta's kid from high school had recommended her after a dispute over a contractor's nails, which is to say she came with the blessing of people who keep receipts. Janine's office smelled like paper and peppermint gum and the sort of competence that is as useful as a warm scarf. We spoke in legal language, and in a language that sounded like the one my grandmother used to tell me when she taught me to spell my name. Careful, letter by letter. Janine listened to the story in a way that made it smaller when I wanted it small, and bigger when I wanted it big enough to take to a judge. She said things that felt like tools, and then she laid them out. "You have a lot going on here," she said. "There are property issues, the physical Springsteen album, the cake, the USB, and then there's intellectual property and right of publicity concerns, especially with recordings of your late husband. We can pursue a replevin action to get the physical property back if it's been taken. We can seek a temporary restraining order to stop them from using or disseminating any of the footage and audio. We can register a copyright in the compilation of videos. That will let us enforce against monetization under the Copyright Act. And we can, just to be thorough, send a demand letter to their counsel warning them about the potential for claims under conversion and intentional interference with prospective economic advantage. But in the right court, drama is called evidence." Janine took photographs, notarized my statements about who had custody of the files and where they'd been, and she called the Copper Fox manager, Remy, whose texts from the night before I had saved. Remy, bless him, sent an affidavit that said he had observed Ashley's assistant handle the cake and had seen a trash bag in the kitchen with a piece of cake being disposed of, and that the manager had made a copy of the slideshow in the office at my request and could confirm the files were my property. Claire, the clipboard girl, who had turned into a small conspirator for the improbable, agreed to give a statement about the event timeline and about the moment Ashley suggested cataloging the gifts and speaking about control of assets. The tattooed caterer wrote, from her phone between plating orders, that she had been asked to hold the cake in the kitchen and that later she had been told to discard any outside food by Glossy Hair. She sent a picture of the dishwashers, laughing with cake on their plates, the same one the manager had emailed me. Images, I realized, are the modern witness. Janine put all of it into a brief, the kind of tidy thing lawyers make that is less about the art of telling a story than the mathematics of wrongdoing. And then she said, "We have to move quickly. If they monetize the content or if they attempt to delete or duplicate files elsewhere, we could be looking at irreparable harm. A court will grant emergency relief if they think you'll lose something that can't be fixed by money." We show witness statements and the post where Ashley preemptively frames the narrative. We show the trash bag photo. We ask the court for an ex parte temporary restraining order, meaning we ask the judge to issue it without them being present, because you would be irreparably harmed if they took the content and posted it. Ex parte orders are for emergencies like this. The threat of evidence disappearing is exactly that. Filing paperwork in a county courthouse feels exactly like handing the world a map and saying, here are the lines that should hold. Janine wrote an affidavit, sober, clear, with citations, and attached exhibits. The 420-page having been drafted by someone with nice handwriting that was the proposed boundary agreement Ashley had left on my counter, images of the Instagram post where Ashley announced the name change with a caption all but daring the internet to cheer, copies of the emails requesting the USB, the Venmo noting payment for the cake, and photos of the cake in the dishwasher as proof of misappropriation. In the affidavit, I swore that my husband's voice was not something I would risk into the wild for the sake of a reel, and that the audio had sentimental value and could not be remedied by money alone. Janine also had me sign a declaration that I had registered a copyright claim in the compilation under the name Daniel O'Connor Home Recordings. It was a small formality. Copyright exists from fixation, yes, but registration gives you the right to statutory damages and makes enforcement cleaner. We didn't have the registration in hand because it takes weeks for the office to process, but certifying intent and being able to show authorship and the original files inside my safes helped the judge understand the timeline. We asked for 3 things immediately: that Ashley, Glossy Hair, Riley the couple's coach, and any of their agents be enjoined from distributing, monetizing, or otherwise using the media, that they be ordered to preserve all their devices and accounts, and that any physical property claimed be returned to me immediately, or else that the court appoint a custodian to control the files pending a hearing. We also asked for an order prohibiting them from posting any defamatory statements about me during the pendency of the motion, because, Janine said plainly, you're not asking for censorship. You're asking for a lid while the court decides if the pot is yours. The court clerk called me to come pick up a stamped copy, and while I sat in the waiting area with the fluorescent hum above me, I felt a lighter weight slip under my ribs. It was not victory, it was a reprieve. But reprieves are a kind of oxygen. The TRO was surgical and immediate. Ashley and her agents were enjoined from posting, sharing, or otherwise publicizing any of the materials in question. They were ordered to preserve their devices and were forbidden from deleting or altering any content. They were ordered to return any physical property that belonged to me. The Copper Fox was ordered to retain any files it had, and both sides were ordered to appear for a preliminary injunction hearing in 7 days. Importantly, the order also included a provision for attorney's fees should the court later find malice or bad faith. When Janine read me the order out loud, I felt foolish and proud in the same moment, like someone who'd been taught to play a certain note and finally got the pitch right. We went to lunch afterward and celebrated with a sandwich I let myself eat without thinking of calories. Loretta came and gave us both a hug and a detailed survival plan about what to say to nosy neighbors. I called Claire and told her what had happened. She gasped, and then made a noise that meant she was more excited about having been useful than mortified by the whole situation. Of course, nothing in this modern theater of a life happens without spectacle. When the TRO was served to Ashley's counsel, they responded in the only way they knew how, with a public relations countermove and privately with panic. Ashley put out a story, a video where she said, breathless and exact, "We are committed to respecting all family narratives and will cooperate with the court." The video was curated. The lighting did 2/3 of the apologizing. She also had her assistant scramble to delete the posts and to wipe cloud storage, though Janine had anticipated the erasure and included in the TRO a request that the court require preservation of deleted materials, metadata preservation, because deleting does not erase the digital echoes. In the week that followed, the worst parts of Ashley's personality came into view. She texted people who had been at the party, suggesting they write witness statements about the misunderstanding and about how the mom had suddenly become dramatic. She attempted to call Remy and offered him a partnership if he would say they'd miscommunicated. Her assistant tried to get the caterer to sign a form deleting the image of staff smiling with my cake. Glossy Hair, when pressed, tried to claim she had simply disposed of hazardous material. You see patterns then. Those who build brands believe in spinning. They do not conceive of belonging as a thing other than an image. But what she had not counted on was the magnetism of ordinary people telling truth. Remy made a simple statement to the effect that he had found nothing hazardous about the cake, and that his staff had enjoyed slices. The caterer gave a detailed timeline. Claire sent a text trail showing the logistics of the night and Ashley's instructions about cataloging gifts. Denise from choir, who had always liked the corners of things and never the center, posted on her private Facebook a short note about how mothers are not props. Her note went to a handful of old choir friends first, and then it spread. Because people who have been held in kindness know the instinct to pass it on. At the preliminary injunction hearing, Ashley's counsel argued that the TRO was an overreach, that Ashley had a right to curate her life, and that Daniel was an adult and could make decisions about his own past. Janine countered with a forensic thread. Dates, emails, the trash photo, witness statements, and the fact that the only footage in question had been in my possession, and that a clear attempt had been made to centralize it in a way that suggested intent to monetize. Janine made a simple but devastating point. Mrs. O'Connor is not asking permission to exist, she said. She is asking the court to stop the defendant from taking her deceased husband's voice, her family history, and treating it like an asset to be sold. This is a question of property and of human dignity. After asking a couple of crisp questions about the steps Ashley had taken to secure materials and the timing of the posts, he extended the TRO into a preliminary injunction pending trial and required Ashley to produce a full accounting of all copies of the materials. He scheduled further hearings and reminded both parties that the court's role was not to referee feelings, but to protect legal rights. To say Ashley was surprised by this outcome is charitable. She had expected, probably, to spin a narrative about boundaries and to have Daniel stand between her and his mother like a velvet rope. Instead, she found herself in a legal squeeze. Her PR team advised a full apology. Janine advised a measured civil approach. And in the end, Ashley's counsel tried both. There was, however, a small crack in the polished surface that I had not predicted. Desperation reveals corners where caution had been painted. Glossy Hair, who had once sneered at me for still carrying cash, texted in the middle of the week and asked to meet for coffee. I sent Loretta with her because one never goes alone to a meeting where a woman may be breaking down. Loretta came back with the kind of report only someone with a directness honed in a life of backyard firewood could give. Glossy Hair had cried and confessed to having felt pressured, by aesthetic, by job, by the idea of being kept if she was useful. She apologized for the trash bag, for feeding my cake to the compost, for not knowing that people could be held as things. She handed Loretta a small envelope with a note inside that said, "Tell Margaret I'm sorry. I was asked to do something I didn't understand." Not the one that had been thrown out, she honored the original, but a new carrot cake with a swirl of cream cheese and a small sprig of rosemary in the batter like the Copper Fox had done with their signature drink. "For Tuesday," she said. "For your people." I cried when she handed it over. It was not because of the cake. It was because food is the closest we get to prayer sometimes. In the middle of the legal back and forth, Daniel retreated. He stopped answering Ashley's group chats and started coming to Tuesday dinner. His watch, his father's gift, tapped at his wrist the way a heartbeat does, constant and insistent. The more he sat with us, the less he said he wanted things curated for public. He started calling me when he was on his way home. He would stand in my kitchen and smell the stew and say, "This smells like Sunday," like it was a spell. He wrote an apology. He retracted a line he had agreed to in a draft statement that made my role sound like antagonism. Slowly, he aligned less with the curated world and more with the one that had his father's laugh in it. And then, the one thing that sealed the turn, Ashley made a small legal misstep. In an effort to establish ownership over assets, she had her counsel file a declaration that included statements that the videos were created by Daniel and family collaborators. That wording was loose enough that Janine could ask for a copy of any original files used in the claimed edits, and critically, it forced Ashley's team to produce metadata. Metadata is the digital equivalent of fingerprints. When the editor's files were produced, Janine's tech guy found timestamps that made it clear the original video files had been uploaded by me months before Ashley's team claimed to have centralized them. And more importantly, the voice being used in an attempted clip that Ashley had set aside to be used in a boutique ad campaign, yes, they'd considered it, was an audio file that had been recorded on my camera in my living room. When confronted with metadata, people make choices. Ashley tried to bluster. Her counsel advised settlement. Glossy Hair, maybe out of guilt or fear, produced a string of messages where she had been instructed to manage narratives. There is a moment in these things when a person realizes they can no longer hide behind a curated smile. The rehearsal falls away. Ashley, for all her armor, stood at a crossroads where privacy law met courtesy and where the court could make her give account. What Janine wanted, and what she told me she would press for, was not theatrical. She wanted a declaration from the court that the materials were my property and an injunction preventing Ashley from using any of them commercially or in a way that implicated my husband's voice without my express consent. She also wanted a stipulation about the house. She intended to draft a letter to Ashley proposing that my house was not, in any way, an asset they could broker without my consent, and that any talk of liquidation should be handled with full disclosure and legal counsel. Janine told Ashley's counsel that if their client continued to threaten alienation, what they had said about grandchildren, she would ask for a protective order preventing contact. It was stern. It was proper. The settlement conversations moved in that bluebell rhythm. Phone calls, offers, counteroffers. Ashley wanted to keep something, an apology, a sense of control. But the court had put a fence around the property and its people. What finally shifted things, and this surprised me as much as anything in the last weeks, was that the people around Ashley began to crack. Riley, the couple's coach, who lived on the doctrine that conflict is a product and product is revenue, called Janine directly and said, "She's in too deep with her brand. She doesn't see people. I'm trying to help, but I also can't be part of coercion." He agreed to be interviewed about what he'd written in the boundary agreement. Claire wrote a note to the court admitting she had been fed lines and that she had been asked to mediate a narrative that made me look like the antagonist. Remy, in a private email to Janine, said he would decline any future partnerships that required erasing mothers. People, even those who are paid to narrate other people's lives, sometimes look at themselves in mirrors that don't lie. The truth is a kind of gravity. It makes flimsy things fall. We settled before a trial. The settlement included a temporary agreement, which Janine insisted be put in a court order, where Ashley agreed to no use of the video or audio without my consent, to return any physical objects, to provide a list of all copies she or her team had, and to refrain from making or facilitating any posts that publicly denigrated me while the matter was pending. The court accepted the settlement as a consent order and issued a judgment that effectively held Ashley to the promises she had made. Ashley also agreed to a limited retraction, language that recognized that she had caused hurt, and to pay a modest portion of my attorney's fees as a gesture that sometimes the law buys civility. It was not a dramatic, headline-grabbing verdict. It was a careful legal rope that prevented the abusive behavior from resuming while preserving options to pursue more if needed. When Janine and I closed the folder that had held the settlement papers, we looked at each other and laughed in that relieved, exhausted way people laugh when a storm has passed, but the house still needs work. "You did this carefully," she said. "You used leverage and you used witnesses. You let the law do the heavy lifting when that was required." The Copper Fox manager offered their projector and a Tuesday night when trivia was low. The caterer, who had become an unlikely ally, offered to make enough cake for the staff and for the small crowd we expected. Claire volunteered to hand out napkins. Remy loaned extra folding chairs. It turned into something that felt like a church potluck. The night of the viewing, the Copper Fox was quieter than the party had been. There was a different kind of light, more honest, less halo, that made freckles look like constellations and people look like people. I climbed on the little stage, not to perform, but to hand a mic to the manager and to let him do the technical part. The slideshow played. Daniel, at 5 in his Batman cape, mid-tumble into a snowbank, his father's voice threading through like a cord. The room hushed. People who had been numb to an aesthetic suddenly recognized a human cadence. Men who'd never admitted it wiped their eyes like men do when they are polite to their own sensitivity. Claire cried into a paper napkin and later told me she had never known that the soundtrack to childhood could be a legal file, but also a benediction. I spoke for maybe 5 minutes. I said the things I had learned, that boundaries are a kindness when they build safety, and that they are cruelty when they build fences to keep others out. That we can choose to curate our lives without erasing the people who made us. I read a line from the letter I had written to Daniel about names and love. After the slideshow, I invited people to the long table where the caterer had set slices of carrot cake, plump and unapologetic. We ate in company that tasted like reckoning made sweet. The legal matter being resolved did not mean there were no consequences. Ashley posted a carefully worded apology that did not escape all critique. I chose not to engage with it on social media. I let the consent order speak through the law and the quietness of my Tuesday dinners speak through my life. Daniel, for his part, made no big social media statements. He came to the house on Tuesdays, and sometimes he'd stay longer. Sometimes he'd leave early. He needed to discover what it meant to be himself without an audience. I had given him space to make mistakes, and then offered him stew to make better ones. There was a small public element to the victory, too. The judge's consent order was filed and thus public record. For those few days, the narrative that had been expertly curated by a click-literate wife lost its monopoly. People read court language, dry, sober, and it had the odd effect of rooting the story back down into ordinary life. The early cheerleaders who had tweeted, "Boundaries," stopped as they saw the legal documents that said simply, "Return property, do not publish, preserve evidence." It put the performative into the realm where gestures must be backed by deeds. The more beautiful consequences were quieter. The caterer, whose name is Mia, started bringing extra food for the Copper Fox's night staff. Claire came to Tuesday dinner with her mother from Ohio that I had promised a cake to. They both cried when they ate it. Remy put Springsteen night on the next trivia calendar. Denise and I sang in choir that Sunday with more gusto. Loretta and I sat on my porch and counted our small victories like chickens in a row. There was a small ceremonial thing I did, because humans like rituals, and because teachers believe in symbols. I took the Springsteen album out of the frame. I had it professionally cleaned. I framed the sleeve, the pencil note visible, and I hung it in the hall where the light falls at a certain hour. I put the 3 USB copies into safes in 3 different places, one in my safe, one in Loretta's porch, the third in a bank deposit box. And I emailed the copies' serial numbers to Janine. I made sure the files were backed up in a way that wasn't online, a series of local redundancies that felt like a stubborn human answer to ephemeral feeds. Then, on a day that felt like spring, I walked to church and sat near the back and sang louder than I had in months. The hymns are plain, but endurance is not. Afterwards, a woman I didn't know came up and said, "Your voice. It moved me." I thought of the mic the Copper Fox had given me that night. The party almost consumed me. And I thought of the voice my husband had left behind in a file on a USB. Voices are ways we stay connected. They are not products. They are not assets for brands. They are the way we remind one another we are human. A few months later, the court closed the matter with a consent decree. Ashley had agreed to not use any media without my consent, to issue a modest correction on her platform, no fanfare, just honesty, and to attend a mediation session on boundaries and family provided by a counselor that Janine recommended because, Janine said dryly, if she wants to call what she does therapy, perhaps she can start with learning to be a decent neighbor. The court awarded a small sum to cover a portion of my fees. It was less about the money than the recognition that the system had listened. Daniel changed his social handle not to erase O'Connor from his life, but to include it as a middle name in his more private account. He still posts skilled photos for his followers on the brand account. I still don't see myself tagged there. But now, on the private one he keeps for family, there are pictures of his porch light and a photo of our key bowl that he commented on with a laughing emoji, and beneath it the words, "Stew tonight?" He came. He sat. We ate. He promised to come again. As for Ashley, she moved to Austin eventually, as she had said. She did so not because she had convinced us all that she needed a new name, but because she wanted a stage where she could start a new era. Moving changes people in ways it can't fix. I hope she finds humility there. I hope she learns to think of other people's property as sacred and not as a pallet. I hold no malice. Malice is heavy, and I prefer to save my energy for soup. But I hold memory and precedent. People learn in different places. The legal remedy was satisfying in the way a clean bandage is. It lets a wound breathe. The moral victory was sweeter. Those people who had been coaxed into believing a brand could stand where a family had been were forced to see that you cannot monetize someone's voice and call it healing. They were forced to acknowledge that kindness cannot be faked into a product. For some, it was a small repentance. For others, it was a beginning of a new vocabulary. The catharsis came in an unexpected way. One Tuesday months later, Remy asked if we could use the projector again. He told me staff had asked if they could watch the slideshow. He said the staff had been talking about the idea of family in the corner they share while washing dishes. I said yes. We set the screen in the Copper Fox office again, and this time when Daniel's father's voice played, the people in that windowless room, dishwashers, bartenders, the tattooed caterer on her day off, hugged each other like they had always been kin and we had just remembered it. After the slideshow, we all went outside. The night smelled like rosemary and lemon. Someone had left a bowl of lemons on a neighbor's stoop, and the copper fox had put out a tray of leftover cookies for staff. I cut a piece of cake and ate it in the parking lot like a small sacrament. I looked at the people around me. Claire, a little less clipped. Remy, a little more gentle. Denise, eyes bright. Daniela's friends, some of whom had been there the night of the party, and now stood sheepish. And I felt an immense, patient peace. I sat in my car after the night ended with Daisy's head in my lap, and the house in the distance lit like a promise. My phone buzzed with a DM from someone I didn't know who had watched the story unfold and wanted to ask what to do when their own mother had been edged out of a life. Another message was from a woman named Rosa, who said her husband had passed years ago and that she had never thought to make backups. She asked if she could come by sometime to learn about safes. I thought of all the things we had done right, made copies, gotten counsel, let witnesses speak, and held a line for dignity. I thought of all the things I had done wrong, like staying too long in the kitchen when I needed to call a lawyer sooner, and of the small corrections I would make. I thought of songs to play on the porch and stew recipes to perfect. The quiet victory was the simplest one. On a shelf in my kitchen, I put a small framed note I had written to Daniel that week. "You are loved," in all names. And below it, in the same neat teacher printing, another line. "Bring your friends for stew. The house remembers who lives here." I placed the framed Springsteen sleeve below the note, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like the house and I agreed. So here's what I learned, and here is the truth I want to leave like a small lantern on your table. Boundaries are necessary, and so is the courage to enforce them. When someone builds a life where the currency is other people's pain, the right response is not necessarily rage. It can be paperwork, witnesses, and small acts of community. The law can be a blunt instrument, but used well, it becomes a scale. And there is real moral force when ordinary people, caterers, clipboard girls, managers, choose to tell the truth. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt edged out by someone who called it boundaries, or if you've been told you were too much for loving with your whole body, know that there are ways to hold your line. Make copies of the things that matter. Ask for help. Witness the witnesses. And when the moment comes, feed the people you love. If this resonates, please like and share. Tell me in the comments, where do you draw the line between protecting your life and letting go? Have you ever had to use the law to protect what was yours? How did you find the courage? Subscribe for more stories where the quiet people find their voices, because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is simply stay.